Welcome to episode 72 of the Rich Roll Podcast with Dr. Frank Lipman. The Rich Roll Podcast. Hey everybody, welcome to the show. I'm Rich Roll. I'm your host. This is the Rich Roll Podcast. Welcome back if you're tuning in again. If you're new, welcome to the show. Thanks for stopping by. There's a lot of podcasts out there. I realize that you have many choices at your disposal, and I appreciate you taking a chance on me. So what do we do here? Well, each week I bring to you the best, the brightest, the most forward-thinking, paradigm-busting minds in health, wellness, fitness, diet, nutrition, athletics, entrepreneurism, creativity, spirituality, yoga, meditation, you name it. We cast a wide net. Basically, I like to interview people that are interesting to me, that are leading amazing lives and are of service to other people, helping other people to improve their condition. And the idea is to provide you with a ton of information so that you can take what resonates with you, incorporate it into your life, and unlock and unleash your best, most authentic self. That is my simple goal here. This week, I'm in New York. Been having a blast. I came out here for a corporate speaking gig. That's what brought me out here. But took the opportunity to stay a couple days longer and sit down with a bunch of interesting people and bang out some podcast guests. So I'm really excited to be able to share with you over the next couple weeks some of the amazing conversations that I've had with new guests, new people. It's awesome. It's been really cool, and it's been fun to be here. I always love coming to New York City. The energy, the vitality, you just can't get it anywhere else, and it definitely is like a reboot for my system. It recharges me and gives me a sense of, renewal, excitement, and it's been cool. We got a big snowstorm here. I've been able to eat at a bunch of awesome restaurants, plant-based restaurants, Candle 79, always my favorite, Angelica Kitchen I'm going to tonight, Cafe Blossom, what else? Juice Press, of course. It's amazing to see how many healthy restaurants are cropping up all over the place, all over New York City. Essentially, there's a cold pressed juice place almost on almost every corner here, which was not the case not too many years ago. So I love it. I'm here with Tyler, my podcast producer, my son, who's been helping me out, and he actually even got to play a music gig at Sidewalk Cafe on the Lower East Side on Monday night. They have a legendary open mic night. It has launched many a musical career. It's a pretty cool room. And Tyler was able to step in and play a couple songs before a live audience in his first trip to New York, which was really super cool. So thanks, Mishka, former podcast guest, Mishka Shabali, for helping hook that up. It was awesome. And we've been having a great time. And one of the reasons we've been having such a good time is I got to sit down with Dr. Frank Lipman, today's guest on the show. So who is Frank Lipman? Well, if you're in New York, you've probably heard of him. He gets a lot of press out here. There was recently a profile on him in the New York Times. I'll put a link up to that in the show notes. But he is quite a prominent wellness warrior out here. An internationally renowned doctor in the field of integrative medicine. So what is integrative medicine? Well, basically, that is a merging of East and West. He is trained in Western medicine practices. He is a doctor. He's an MD. But what makes him unique and special is the way that he has merged his practice by integrating techniques from more Eastern practices, I guess you could say. Things like meditation, acupuncture, homeotherapy, things like that we talk about today. And he's been doing this for about 20 years. A couple of years ago, I think 2010, he opened up his wellness center, which is called 1111. It's in the Flatiron district of New York. But he's been practicing this particular sort of customized brand of medicine for like 20 years. I mean, long before it was hip and cool and sort of a zeitgeist thing. And he's helped thousands of people reclaim their vitality and improve their lives over the years. His focus is on sustainable wellness, which I love. I'm all about that. I'm not about the quick fix or shedding 5 pounds or, kind of the I don't know, the biohack or the life hack. Like I'm looking at it from a perspective of permanent lifestyle alteration to kind of set you on a new trajectory for a healthier life. And he shares that perspective. He offers his patients this customizable blend of Western medicine, again, with like acupuncture, nutritional counseling, vitamins and supplements, which he believes in, herbs, relaxation techniques, physical therapy, body work. I mean, who doesn't love body work, right? And what's cool is when you go to his office, it's not like stepping into a doctor's office. It's more like stepping into, I don't know, a meditation temple or a Kundalini yoga studio. The elevator opens and you're in this suite with, beautiful hardwood floors, and it has this very warm, inviting feeling to it. And you're immediately greeted by the office dog, Coconut. So, I mean, I'm telling you, it's unlike any other doctor's office that I've ever been in. And this is what doctor's offices should be like. They should make the patients feel warm and at home and, feel like they're going to be taken care of, that they're going to be listened to, and that they're going to be in good hands. And in many ways, Frank really is a doctor for the modern age, the internet age. I mean, he gave a TED Talk. He blogs for the Huffington Post. He writes on his own blog. He makes videos. He has his own sort of, personal brand behind what he does, but he's very interested in connecting with people in different ways outside of, office hours. And that's what I love about him. He's super passionate about his message, and he's really busy. So it was an honor and a privilege to sit down with a guy. I mean, this is a guy who's, has patients like, Gwyneth Paltrow and Maggie Gyllenhaal and Peter Sarsgaard. And like, this is a guy who doesn't have a lot of free time. And so it was amazing to be able to grab him and get a quiet moment with him to talk with him. So our conversation is amazing, inspiring. We talk about all these subjects over the course of, hour and 15 minutes or whatever it is. Frank has also written 2 books, which I think you should check out. His first one's called Revive, Stop Feeling Spent and Start Living Again. And the second one is called Total Renewal, 7 Key Steps to Resilience, Vitality, and Long-Term Health. The funny thing was, too, when our interview was over, he went to his bookshelf and he grabbed a handful of CDs and handed them to Tyler. So basically every year he puts together like a mixtape and he makes a CD out of it and he gives it to his friends and his patients. And I'm going to share the artwork for these CDs on the blog, so check it out there. But they're hilarious. They're like, I'll just read you a few of these. One's called Lipman's Upbeat Mix for 2011, Dance Locally, Listen Globally. Lipman's Boogaloo Upbeat Mix 2010-19 International Booty Shakers. Like, he's got these crazy artwork on these on these insane mixtape CDs that he gives out. And I'm thinking, like, what doctor does that? Like, that's awesome. It's so cool. Anyway, I love talking to him, and I hope that you enjoy our conversation. If you want to check out his books, and also if you want to support the podcast, the best way to do that, other than telling a friend, which is first and foremost in this free content, which will always be free. Spread the word, tell a friend. Check out the Amazon banner ad at richroll.com. If you click on that when you're going to buy something on Amazon, go to that first, click that, get whatever you're going to get on Amazon. Does not cost you a penny extra, and Amazon kicks us a little bit of loose change our way, which helps pay the bills for the podcast. So we appreciate everybody who's been doing that. And it was pointed out to me that some people might be concerned about privacy. Am I able to see what your purchases are? And no, I'm not. I have no idea what you guys are buying. I don't have access to that kind of information. All I know is I get, there's a number, and they wire me a little bit of money every month, and that's it. So if you're concerned about me having any knowledge about what your Amazon purchases are when you use the Amazon banner ad, I can put your mind at ease about that. There's nothing to be concerned there for. So anyway, yes, Amazon banner ad, thanks so much for you guys that have been using it. We have a donate button at richroll.com for people that want to go the extra mile and show their support. Again, the show's free. You're not obligated to do that. That's only if it feels right to you. But we appreciate everybody who has done that. You can throw us a little loose change on a one-time basis, weekly, monthly, whatever you want. But anyway, thank you guys, everybody who's been doing that. And again, it's been a great week in New York. I'm going to be bringing tons of amazing interviews to you guys over the next couple weeks, which feels good, having a little fresh air on the podcast. And I wanted to thank everybody who gave such great feedback on last week's episode with Adam Scully Power. That was definitely a tearjerker, a very inspirational story, and I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. So looking to share more kind of everyman stories like Adam's coming up over the podcast, because those seem to really hit a chord and people enjoy that. So anyway, without further ado, you guys, let's get into the interview. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Frank Lipman. Enjoy. There's a certain poetry in the sort of ethos behind your clinic, and this idea that before there can be rebirth or renewal, there must be destruction. Yes? And this sort of is how you came up with the name 1111 for your center.
Well, maybe I'll burst your bubble straight away. I came up with the name because at the time I was a little bit obsessed with this whole 1111. This was 1991, and the idea that there'd be a shift in consciousness. Mm-hmm. I got caught up in this whole 1111, the shift in consciousness, and that's how the name came about. It was sort of a spur-of-the-moment thing.
Right, but it's Mayan in origin,
exactly,
right? Which
yes.
means doom before the rebirth.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, it is. Absolutely, yes.
It's sort of like
yes, absolutely,
the Hindu goddess Kali, the goddess of destruction. Before there can be a rebirth.
Okay, right. I've never thought of it that way.
We must tear it down first and create the foundation.
Well, thank you. Okay, it's the first time I've seen it in that perspective. But yeah, that's true. That's exactly the way I feel about the medical system.
So, so tell me a little bit about what you do here.
So, I am trained in Western medicine. I'm a doctor. I was a doctor anyway in a past life. And what I realized early on is in Western medicine, we're really great at treating acute medical emergencies, acute surgical emergencies, if someone's acutely ill. And that's the way we get trained at medical school. You get trained to treat heart attacks and take out appendices and treat acute pneumonia. But when I went into practice after my training, people started coming to me with symptoms that they were feeling tired and they couldn't poop, and their digestion was off, and they were stressed out. And I had no tools in Western medicine to help these people. Mm-hmm. So any doctor, if they're really honest with themselves, realizes early on that we don't really have any tools to help most of the problems that people come to them with.
Right, it's more diagnose and prescribe if there's something that you can...
Yeah, I mean, our tools are medicine or surgery. It's drugs or surgery. We don't really have anything else. Mm-hmm. So, I grew up in South Africa, and the tribe that I was moving with, my friends and the people I was friendly with, we were doing quite a bit of drugs in those days. We got the 60s in the 70s in South Africa.
I saw Waiting for Sugar Man.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So Sugar was my closest friend growing up.
Oh, is that right?
Right. So Sugar, who is my closest friend, we were. I think maybe smoking a lot of pot may have opened me up, and these type of people were interested in alternatives. So from an early on, I sort of started thinking there must be other ways.
Mm-hmm. But this is before you even went to medical school?
No, this is during and after medical school. This is in the late 70s.
Gotcha.
And
in South Africa.
In South Africa. And in the practice that I worked with in South Africa, it was a general practice. This is after my training. And the doctor used to see all the lefties and all the artists. Mm-hmm. And these people were coming into the office, and they were telling me, they went to the homeopath and he gave me this and my stomach is better. Or they went to the acupuncturist, and there was one acupuncturist in Johannesburg, and their back was better. And And I started thinking to myself that this is interesting. These are problems that I can't help, and these people are going to these quacks and they're getting better. And I better start checking it out. And that was sort of my first real exposure. I mean, I had been exposed to traditional African medicine and also noticed that sometimes that helped. So my mind was being, exploded open by all these factors, the drugs that we were doing and the exposure I had to these alternatives. So it was sort of just common sense for me to start exploring these things. So this is late 70s, 1980. I started studying homeopathy because there was a strong homeopathic tradition in South Africa at the time. Because it was an English colony. In England, homeopathy was quite big, and we got that tradition. So I started studying homeopathy and started doing Tai Chi. And in 1983, my wife and I decided we just didn't want to live under apartheid anymore, and we decided to leave. And the doctor I was working with gave me a gift to go, and it was the Barefoot Doctor's Manual, which is this interesting book on what the Chinese did in the rural areas. They used to train these barefoot doctors to go and treat them there. And he gave me this book. He said, go study acupuncture, which was meaningless to me at the time. But
and this is relatively, it's more than progressive at the time.
Yeah, at
this
the time.
It's not happening,
no.
it is to the extent that it is now.
No, this is like 30-odd years ago. Yeah,
right.
This was pretty radical at the time. But for me, I was on such a journey. I knew it was right, so it wasn't even a question. It was the same thing. I always give this comparison. Growing up in South Africa, when you grow up in South Africa during apartheid, you know it's a rotten system and you know it's wrong. And you're looking around and everyone's sort of living like normally as if nothing's happening. And I felt exactly the same way about the medical system, that it was so obvious there's got to be a better way. And there obviously is a better way because these people were getting better, but no one's acknowledging it. So it was in a way easier for me because I knew apartheid was wrong. And I knew that the Western medical model was limited as well. So
but coming to the United States, did you have an expectation that you would be welcomed for this more progressive, ideas about treating patients? Or
well, no. Well, what happened was when I came to the United States, I got a job in the South Bronx because they sponsored me for a green card, and everyone said, "Well, you got to do internal medicine, don't do family medicine." So I got this job. They sponsored me for a green card, and here I'm in this residency, doing something that I wasn't particularly interested in. And after a week or two, I came home and I said to my wife, I don't know if I can be a doctor here. Because even the part of Western medicine that I enjoyed in South Africa, taking a good history, examining a patient, really getting to know a patient, the relationship was important because in South Africa we couldn't do all these expensive tests. And here I come to the States and in the residency program, you had to you take a quick history, you draw the bloods, you go study what the story is, and you look at the results, and you present it the next day to the professor. And there was nothing about taking a good history, spending time with the patient. I said to my wife, the things that I actually enjoy with patients, developing relationships with people, it's just not happening. I don't want to be a doctor here.
Right, it's just a numbers game. You got to churn through so many people.
Yeah, and
right. And some hard cases, I would imagine, in the Bronx. A lot of addiction cases.
In those days, that was crack and heroin were
right.
epidemics. So you're seeing really sick people. And I'd heard about this acupuncture clinic, which was actually attached to the hospital where they did drug detox. And I'd actually been taken there on a tour. When I first came to the hospital, there was a Hispanic woman said, we got talking, we got friendly, and she said, well, let me take you on a tour of the South Bronx to places you as a white boy are never going to see. And she took me on this little tour of this burnt-out area, and one of the places we stopped was this acupuncture clinic. And it's pretty mind-blowing. So I thought, okay.
And you're remembering the words of your mentor back in South Africa.
Exactly. So everything, everything was falling into place. So I walk over, one day after a couple of weeks during my residency, and I walk into this burnt-out building again. And you walk into this building and you see about 40 or 50 heroin addicts sitting quietly with needles in their ears. And I went, whew, this is really interesting. These are the same patients that are pulling out IVs in the ward. They were really difficult to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
And here they're sitting really quietly. So I thought, I've got to check this out. So I went and I spoke to the guy who ran the clinic, Mike Smith. I said, Mike, this is a story. I'm from South Africa, yada, yada. And he was intrigued that I was from South Africa because he wanted to know more about South Africa.
Mm-hmm.
And we got sort of talking, and he said to me, look, you can come hang out here whenever you want. You can come learn acupuncture. I know you're doing your residency, but, feel free to come here. And I started going there more and more often.
Mm-hmm.
So I started living these two lives, one at the hospital where I was seeing these acutely ill patients, and Western medicine was fantastic. And then at the other place, I was seeing these acupuncture patients, and patients were coming in with different problems.
Mm-hmm.
And you sort of could see, it was pretty easy to see that the one worked really well for the one type of problem and the other worked really well
Mm-hmm.
for the other type of problem. And it was obvious to me that the best medicine would be a combination of the
Right.
two.
Mm-hmm.
If someone's really sick, if they need surgery, if they need acute intervention, the ICU, Western medicine's great. But if they have some chronic problem, or they have back pain, or they're tired, the acupuncture clinic and Chinese medicine was better.
Mm-hmm.
So I saw early on, this is like 1984, that obviously the best medicine is going to be some type of combination of the two.
Right. So this is planting the seed. And where does that lead you after your residency?
So after my residency, during my residency, I spent more and more time at the acupuncture clinic. And by the time I finished my residency, I'd actually got my 300 hours, which I needed as a doctor to practice acupuncture in New York. So I knew I wanted to do something holistic. So I spent a little bit more time at the acupuncture clinic, and I got a job on the Lower East Side at this very interesting community clinic that was interested in starting acupuncture and alternative stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I got a job there, and I started doing some working as a doctor, but also doing acupuncture and using Chinese herbs, and also working at the acupuncture clinic where I was getting more experience with acupuncture. And at this clinic, the guy, Paul Ramos, who's now died, was so ahead of his time. I mean, he was bringing this stuff to the Hispanic community on the Lower East Side.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was pretty wild.
Yeah.
And
that was a jungle back then.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he was a very cool guy, and he sort of knew, the direction. And he brought me in, he brought a nutritionist in, and I got friendly with this nutritionist, Susan Luck, who sort of became like a mentor to me. And she told me about Jeff Bland. And if anyone doesn't know who Jeff Bland is, Jeff Bland's the father of functional medicine.
Mm-hmm.
So in 1988, because at my residency I did 84 to 87, and then I started working at Betances in 87. And then Susan introduced me to Jeff Bland, and Jeff was going around the country in those days already, lecturing whoever would listen to him.
Mm-hmm.
So I met Jeff Bland in 1988, and Jeff was articulating exactly what I was feeling, because here I was learning about Chinese medicine, and they were talking about qi and energy and this language that just didn't make sense from a Western perspective. Right. It was a completely different language. And Jeff had put it all together. He was talking Chinese medicine, but he was talking from a physiology perspective and biochemistry. So it sort of made sense to me. It was like such an aha experience to listen to Jeff talking, because he was using the philosophy of creating balance and improving function of Chinese medicine, but he was talking about physiology and biochemistry and everything that I'd learned in Western medicine. So there's a perfect combination of the two.
Couching it in a vernacular that's translatable to sort of the Western logical mind and approach. So
exactly.
Back at that time, what was the typical case that you would see of somebody coming in to this particular clinic on the Lower East Side, and what would the treatment protocol be? What were the results that you were seeing?
Well, what was interesting was at that stage the AIDS epidemic was a major epidemic, and I very soon got the name in the HIV community that you could actually get acupuncture, and we started teaching Qigong, and we started doing this interesting stuff. I mean, we were all learning at the time. But because the clinic took Medicaid, we started getting a lot of the word got out that you could get on your Medicaid, you could go get acupuncture and herbs and nutrition therapy at this Betances Health Unit. So very quickly, I developed this huge AIDS community of patients coming to see me. So I'd say most of the patients were HIV patients coming with all various things. But I mean, I think somehow in that community, because they were sort of not used to getting drugs all the time, they were more open to alternative stuff. So a lot of the community people were coming in and were happy not to get drugs and, talk about their diet or use some herbs or some supplements.
And so what kind of relief were you able to provide?
Well, I think it's hard to say. I think the beauty of acupuncture is most people are going to feel a difference quite soon. I think my practice and our practice in general in those days wasn't particularly sophisticated. We were sort of using a Western, we were using Chinese medicine, but it was the way I was working there is I was still thinking like a Western doctor, and instead of drugs, I'd use herbs. So instead of something for indigestion, I'd use some herbs for it. So it was a different way. It hadn't been ingrained into me. The Chinese way hadn't been ingrained into me in those days to actually look for the underlying imbalance or what the underlying cause was. I mean, I'd sort of learned that, but it wasn't part of my being, which is completely different now. I mean, the more you do it, you sort of get a sense of what's really good medicine. In those days, I was sort of practicing from a Western perspective and using sort of herbs or something to treat the way I was thinking, which is unfortunately what a lot of doctors still do. I mean, I don't think until they really get it in them that it's not about just giving a name to something and treating the name. It's what's really going on underneath. And I think Jeff Bland's done a wonderful job of really training doctors to reprogram the way they think and to really look for the underlying causes.
You mean in a true sort of preventative medicine, holistic sense?
Yeah, I think it goes way beyond preventive. I think it's treating problems downstream. So let's take an example. If an asthmatic patient, or let's take heartburn, because more people probably have heartburn. Someone comes in with heartburn. The one way of treating it is saying, okay, you got heartburn, and here's some supplements that are going to help your heartburn. So instead of taking your Nexium, you take the aloe vera or the deglycinated licorice, which is fine. I mean, it's better to do that than to take the drug. The other way is saying, why is that person getting heartburn? What is the underlying problem? Is that there's too much acid, there's too little acid, which can cause heartburn? Is the imbalance of the good and the bad bacteria? Are certain foods triggering this problem? So you look at all the possible underlying issues that you need to address, rather than just treating the symptoms.
I mean, to fast forward to kind of, taking a bird's eye view of wellness today in the medical profession right now, I mean, we are in this bizarre kind of mashup situation where we've never been more sick as a society. Heart disease, obesity, diabetes, cancer, the statistics are insane.
Ridiculous.
And yet at the same time, we've never been more fascinated or intrigued by wellness. I mean, wellness is really, at the advent, it's very much a zeitgeist thing in a way that maybe you might have not even predicted, 20 years ago when you started this. So it's a really great time for the message that you're putting out there. And yet there seems to be this disconnect between what's actually going on with the typical American and, what's going on mindbodygreen.com or at 1111.
Well, I've been thinking about this a lot, more and more as I get older. Your whole, in the old days, I was so passionate about it. We're going to do this and we got to change this and yada yada. Now that as I get older, I start sort of trying to think about the perspective changes in terms of why did this actually happen. In those days I wasn't thinking of why it's happening. I saw it as wrong and I wanted to change it.
That's taking that Chinese medicine approach to a sociological problem.
And I think I know why. What happened, if you look at pictures of the 50s and 60s, and part of why I was attracted to America was the hippies, to be quite honest, because as I said, we got the hippies. And that was quite an attraction, why I wanted to come to America. It was, Frank Zappa and all that music and that culture sort of was quite attractive to me. But if you look at those pictures, most of those people were skinny. This was the 60s and 50s. I mean, there are no clothes, but most people were skinny. And I've looked at pictures of people in the 50s, people were skinny. No one was talking about diet then either. And then in the 60s, we got into this thing, and I mean, I've started reading more and more about it, this whole low-fat, this whole concept of what foods, certain foods are bad and certain foods are good, and the food industry started proliferating and producing all this junk food. And we started getting these experts telling us to eat in a certain way. And it's only really since the 60s that we've had this major issue with diabetes and heart disease. And it was always around a little bit, but it's much, much worse now. And if you look at, even in South Africa, the same thing happened as we started putting that junk food and that crappy food into the local cultures. Most of the traditional black people, when they lived in the bush where they lived, they ate what was around. But when they came into the city, they started eating our white bread and all the white man's food. And they started developing the same diseases that the white man was getting. And so I think a lot of this has to do, and it's not really, I can't say this as a conspiracy theory because I don't think it was done on purpose, but I think as the food industry and people started getting into ways of cheaper ways and more efficient ways of how we could feed the masses, and we had these experts saying, well, low fat is bad and these whole grains are good, and the food industry sort of followed those principles, we created this disaster we're in.
Right.
And I think from my perspective, I see so many, most people shouldn't be insulin resistant or carbohydrate sensitive, but most people I see are that, and we've become that because of all the crap in our food.
Right. We just completely, bombarding our systems with these refined sugars, refined grains, refined flours, and all of these processed foods that just wear our system out. I mean, that's what creates that sort of perpetual chronic inflammation.
Exactly.
And persistent state of eating these high sugar refined foods burns us out. It creates that insulin resistance. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. That's exactly what happens. And our bodies just can't process that stuff. Now, some people can, but most people can't. And I think, what I find interesting, because, as I said, I've been very reflective in seeing what's happened to the culture, because I've been doing this for so long. What's actually happening, and which I love, is you have people on the internet like you who aren't the authorities actually talking about certain ways to eat and healthier ways of eating. So this information is actually coming, through the internet. It's not coming from above. It's not coming from authorities. It's not coming from the government. It's not coming from the doctors or the people who should know this stuff. It's coming actually from the people. And there's this huge movement, whether it's Mind Body Green or what you're doing or the paleo movement. It's these grassroots movement coming from people who are experimenting with, who's saying, obviously something's wrong. They're changing their diets. They're feeling much better. And they're going on the internet saying, wow, look, I did this. I feel much better.
Without anything, there's nothing to gain. That people are just sharing their experience authentically. And
I love it.
And that creates a credibility that you don't get when you watch an advertisement, right? So there's that combined with, I think there's a real appetite and thirst for sustainable long-term solutions to diet, wellness, health,
right.
and a reaction, sort of the pendulum swinging backwards, where people are saying, like, I don't want to live this way anymore, and I don't believe all the hype about the latest diet fad that's coming down the pike, because I've seen it before. We all know where that leads. It's not working. So what is going to actually work?
Right.
Right.
So it's fascinating. I mean, I love it. I mean, it's really fascinating for me to watch this whole thing blooming. And
well, it's so amazing because you've been doing this forever, and now like there couldn't be more interest in what you're doing. I mean, you could not have predicted this level of excitement about this, something you've been passionate about your whole life.
Right, and it's fantastic. And what I love about it, it's actually coming from the bottom up. It's coming from the people. The doctors still don't get it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's interesting that what does it take for the medical system to realize that there's something wrong with the system? I mean, what does it take?
I don't know. I mean, that was one of my questions that I jotted down was what does a typical conversation look like when you're speaking with a traditional Western doctor who's interested in what you're doing? I mean, is there sort of curiosity? Is there resistance?
All the above. I think there's not enough curiosity. I mean, I still can't get over the fact when we have patients who come in, let's say, with rheumatoid arthritis, and they change their diet and they get better and they go back to their doctor and they tell their doctor what they've done, that the doctor isn't even interested in finding out what he did. Mm-hmm. They'd rather just push these. I mean, there's so many toxic drugs out there. So I think I'm still amazed that there's not that much curiosity, because more and more people are actually getting better by doing things out of the medical system. Mm-hmm. And you'd imagine that doctors would be piqued at least a little bit to see what the hell these patients are doing. Most aren't. There is some curiosity. There's more and more doctors leaning in this, are becoming more interested. Mm-hmm. Part of the problem I do see a lot of the time is they're still stuck in a model that is a little bit archaic, which they can't get over the fact that their model is wonderful at acute care or emergency medicine, and it's not working for all these chronic diseases.
Right.
Now, I think someone like Jeff Bland is doing a wonderful job at educating more and more doctors, but I think it is hard for it. It took me a long time to really get it, It took me a number of years to really understand in my being, not to think the way I got brainwashed to think, or to realize that that's great. If someone's coming with a heart attack, with chest pain, I'm not going to give them acupuncture.
Right.
So once you start getting that, then it's easy. Mm-hmm. And I think more and more doctors are starting to get that.
Well, I think there has to be a systemic change. I mean, it has to be part of the curriculum. It has to be part of their training. I mean, you had the impetus to seek it out on your own. You had this, wild hippie flair to you that drew you to this, but not necessarily everybody has that. And so if it's not presented to them, they can't be expected to have an understanding of how it fits in with everything else that they know about practicing medicine.
Right. And also the problem is also that a lot of the time the way it's been presented to them in the system is sort of, okay, here's Western medicine. We'll teach you a little bit of alternative medicines to sort of add to what you're doing. Mm-hmm. What we really need is a completely different way of thinking about it. And that's not really happening enough. It's not happening in the institutions. And that's the problem.
Well, we need more guys like you to make that happen. So I want to switch gears a little bit and talk about inflammation more specifically and food intolerances, because I know that's a big focus of what you do here. And I think that, so when you cast the umbrella term of inflammation, that really is, such a massive part of what is making people ill. And it seems to be something that can be easily rectified with some pretty simple lifestyle choice alterations.
Right. So inflammation is interesting because inflammation can come from certain foods that trigger inflammation, and a lot of the foods that people are eating actually do trigger inflammation. The sugar, the gluten. I'm a huge believer, and that gluten is a big problem, and that's because we see so many people who they stop gluten and all sorts of problems get better.
Right.
But sugar, gluten, dairy would be the three big ones that trigger inflammation. But I think what people and even people in the alternative world are not really getting, and which I think is a major issue, is often the inflammation is coming from a gut that's imbalanced.
Mm-hmm. The microbial ecology.
Exactly, your microbiome, the balance of the good and the bad bacteria. And so many people, most people have this imbalance, partly because of the foods they're eating, the antibiotics in a lot of the animal products, the number of antibiotics they've taken over the years, other drugs they've taken, GMOs can do it. So you get this imbalance in the gut. And then what happens is, firstly, you don't digest those foods that you're normally eating properly. And because they're not digested properly, they can go through a damaged gut wall and trigger inflammation.
Mm-hmm.
But even the toxins released by this imbalance in gut and bacteria is a huge source of inflammation and toxicity. So I think people get that foods can do it, but probably more important is how that food is digested and what's going on in your gut.
Mm-hmm.
Because something I learned early on in Chinese medicine, I had these, my second level of Chinese medicine came through Harriet Bainfeld and Ephraim Korngold in San Francisco. They wrote a book called Between Heaven and Earth.
Mm-hmm.
Brilliant people. I mean, I love them. They really taught me how to think differently about the body. But to them, always the gut was the center, was the earth element. And when the earth goes off, everything goes off. And even in most non-traditional medicines, I once got taught by a famous herbalist, when you don't know what's going on, you treat the gut.
Mm-hmm.
And I think in this day and age, in particular, the gut is a huge issue. And when you have this dysbiosis, or this imbalance in the good and the bad bacteria, that's a huge source of toxicity and inflammation. And if you don't treat that, the inflammation is not going to go. It may get better when you remove the foods.
Mm-hmm.
It's not going to go away completely. So it's
until
really
you actually change the
exactly
nature of the gut biome.
Exactly.
I think that's super fascinating, and I feel like that this interest and focus on the microbiome is something that's really only getting into public consciousness, even just in the last year.
I know, it's unbelievable. It's fantastic. And I think that's going to shift medicine more
huge.
than anything.
Yeah. And when I kind of started my journey, I mean, back 2007 or 8, when I first began to change my diet and look at my lifestyle habits, etc. I have a good friend and somebody who's worked with me extensively named Compton Ram. He's a PhD in microbiology. And he started hammering home this idea to me early and often, all the time, and he would, concoct these crazy smoothies for me to help get my gut biome on the right track. And I became fascinated with this, and I would talk about it, and people would look like I'm crazy. But now, literally, in the last year, now it's a thing, and I think it's hugely important. But I think it's important to be able to give people some idea of how they can course correct this if they feel like they're on the wrong track with it, or how do you even know if you're out of balance?
Well, that's a good question. I think the easiest place or the easiest way to know is if your digestion is off. If you're still getting bloated, or you constipated, or you have loose stools, or you have indigestion, if you have any digestive symptoms, I usually assume that the microbiome is off. I, in my practice here, probably start 70 to 80% of the people who come in, we treat the we give herbal antibiotics and probiotics, because you've got to understand the microbiome. There are more bacteria in your gut than you have cells in your body.
Right.
You have thousands and thousands of different strains, and we don't really know exactly what's going on. So it's a crapshoot. So you're guessing, and what we usually do initially with most of our patients, we take them off all the common foods that can trigger inflammation, the sugar and the gluten and the dairy and the soy and the processed food and the junk food and alcohol. Mm-hmm. And at the same time, we usually give them herbal antibiotics. And I have a cleanse, and that's basically what the cleanse does. We give them herbal antibiotics in the cleanse. We often use probiotics as well. Mm-hmm. So I do it at the same time. And it's amazing how people respond. But I mean, some people will do well with just the dietary changes, but when you add those herbs that actually kill the bad bacteria, people do so well. Right.
It's amazing. And it sounds like such a foreign concept, but the example that I always use, and I'm interested in what you think of this, is when you watch the documentary, what's it called, with Morgan Spurlock, when he eats McDonald's every I want to say Fat Second Early Day, but it's not Super Size Me. So you'll notice that the first couple of days that he's eating McDonald's all day long, he's getting sick. Like, he can't stand the idea of eating it. But when you fast forward 2 weeks later, he wakes up in the morning feeling sick and does not feel right until he eats the McDonald's.
Exactly.
And then he says, I feel great now.
Exactly.
So what I'm seeing is a shift in his microbiome.
Right.
That microbial ecology has changed, and it now it feeds on that McDonald's food. It needs that McDonald's food to survive, and it's triggering his system to say, get me more of that, get me more of that.
Right. And I mean, it's complicated because there's no question that happens, but then there's also the idea of these foods are addictive. I mean, sugar and gluten and a lot of, and the food companies know this. I mean, they're making foods that are addictive. And now we know that a lot of these foods actually trigger or light up the same part of the brain that heroin does. So we're dealing with drug addicts. I mean, we saw a patient today who was an ex-heroin addict, and he got off heroin, and he comes in here and the first thing he said, because he knew he was going to have to change his diet, he said he's not disciplined enough to change his diet. And I had to explain to him, it's not really discipline. We have this idea that you've got to be disciplined. The problem is these foods are addictive. You are basically an addict. This is the same thing over again, except it's not heroin, but it's sugar and junk food and gluten. And they're causing and triggering the same chemicals that your heroin did. So we got to get it through to people that these are addictions that are being created. It's not just about being disciplined to not eat sugar and gluten. It's not as simple as that. Your body, I mean, the same thing that happens to drugs happens when you eat these foods, like what happened to Morgan Spurlock, what happens to all of us. You eat the food like you feel like crap initially, and then your body adapts, and you stop feeling so bad from the food. That's what happens with drugs. So these are complicated things.
Yeah, I mean, I think, if people doubt that supposition, they should read Salt, Sugar, Fat, Michael Morris's book, where he explains this in detail and sort of uses the analogy of the tobacco companies in the 70s and all the science and research that goes into specifically devising foods that are going to trigger that addictive response. And I think the appropriate way of dealing with that is to borrow from the parlance of recovery and say, this is not about willpower. This is about surrender. This is not about you being a weak person. We're dealing with a beast here, and it needs you need to shift your perspective on how you deal with it, and deal with it in the same way that you would treat somebody who's struggling with a heroin addiction or something of that nature.
And that hasn't got into the culture zeitgeist yet. And I think if we can get that in, that these are drugs, these are addictive drugs that you need to get over, that would help. And you talk about, the tobacco industry. I think the junk food industry, the sugar industry is the same. They use exactly the same tricks that the tobacco industry use. They put out this information to make people question that these are harmful to you.
Right.
They're using exactly
because
the same.
If the consumer is confused, that plays into them. As long as people are confused, then they'll continue to buy their product.
And they want to keep the consumer confused. They're doing exactly what the tobacco industry. It's criminal what's going on. I mean, it's these health issues have become political issues. I mean,
and emotional issues. I mean, there's nothing, it's, in my experience, talking about diet and food is about as emotionally charged as religion or politics. And I think that confusion kind of trickles over into your sort of dietary peculiarities, whether you're a low carb person, or you're a paleo person, or you're a vegan, or you're no sugar, no grains, or, then there's the high fat crowd or whatever. And it's like, these people, of which we play a part in this whole sort of dialogue, of course, but to the extent that we argue amongst each other, that keeps the general public, the guy who's going to McDonald's every day, saying, well, they can't figure it out, so I'm just going to keep eating McDonald's until they do.
Well, this is what we were talking about, this thing exactly today, because the reality is there is no one right diet for everyone. Some people do really well on a paleo diet, or no grains, no whatever. Some people do well on just removing gluten. Some people do well on a vegan diet. I mean, there is no. It's hard to say there is one right diet. You got to play around and see what works for you. Having said that, the majority of people that we see in this practice are carbohydrate sensitive, should be cutting down on their carbohydrates, and do much better when they do that. But if you're not carbohydrate sensitive, there's no, I don't think that diet's going to work for you. So you really need to play around with it. But I think people really need to, it pisses me off, this paleo world and the vegan world, and everyone's got it doesn't work for everyone.
Right.
People really need to get that. You've got to see what works for you and go with it.
Mm-hmm. And I think you can look at the shared commonalities between all of them, which are really, at their root about eating whole foods close to their natural state. It's about eating an anti-inflammatory, more alkaline-forming diet. It's about getting rid of the processed foods. It's all these things that are kind of at the core essence of all these. And the rest is the cherry on top. It's these details that we can quibble over.
Yeah.
But I do like that idea of, a patient coming in and you saying, well, we have to find out what's going on with you before we can say you should do this, that, or the other, whether it's your lifestyle habits, your dietary habits, or your blood work. Let's look at these food sensitivities, and that kind of dovetails into what I want to talk about next, which is gluten and gluten sensitivity. Very popular subject right now. There's some controversy. Some people think it's overblown. This idea of sensitivity versus celiac, and all I know is in my own personal experience that when I eat gluten, I don't feel so good. I feel sluggish. My eyes swell up. I get puffy. There's an inflammatory response, and I don't have celiac.
Exactly.
So somewhere I'm somewhere on that spectrum of sensitivity, and I'm not perfect at cutting gluten out of my diet, but I know that when I do, I feel better.
Okay, so that's a great question, because there is a misunderstanding, and it's actually very simple, and I don't give a shit what experts say. We see this every day in our practice. There is this whole spectrum of gluten sensitivity, from not being sensitive to gluten, which is unusual, to celiac disease. And we see this all the time. People come in and they do the celiac test and it's negative, and the doctors say, well, you don't have celiac disease, you can eat gluten. It's nonsense. Most people actually fit on the spectrum somewhere, like you, like me. I can have a little bit of gluten, it's not the end of the world. But I know if I have a little bit too much, or if I'm starting to eat it a bit too frequently, I start getting inflammation. First place I feel it is my toes. I actually get this like inflammation in my toes. And I know something I've been eating, and it's often gluten. So I hardly eat gluten anymore, and I'm not obsessive. Sometimes if I'm like in Italy or wherever, and I want to eat, actually I don't get that reaction in Italy, interestingly enough.
Yeah, but that gets into like the different ways that we refine our grains.
So we'll talk about that. But sometimes I want a piece of bread or some gluten, and I have it, and then I suffer the consequences. But most people fit into that spectrum where they can have a little bit, and it's probably not a problem. As they go over their tolerance level, they get symptoms. And I know for sure. I don't have to have a study. I know that's the reality for most people, because I've just seen thousands of people where this happens, where their celiac test is negative, but they're still reacting to gluten. And it's probably because the gluten, the wheat of today is very different to the wheat of our ancestors. It's an altered grain. And maybe because of that, there's so many theories. What I don't get into, for instance, the paleo theory of why why you should be eating this way. Whether that's true or not, I think I don't really care. Some people do well on a paleo diet. Some people don't do well. I don't know if it's just because of people can't tolerate grains and all the lectins. And I'm sort of just working clinically, or I sort of go by what I see clinically in my experience. But most people that we see in this practice are somewhat sensitive to gluten. Some people more so than others, but most people are somewhat sensitive. And I think that's because the wheat is different. And I go to Italy, and we have patients who go to Italy and have the pasta and the bread there and don't seem to have reactions. I thought that was crazy at first, but I've gone there. The same things happened to me. first of all, well, maybe I'm on holiday and maybe it's happening because of that.
Yes.
But I hear
you
this.
have an extra endorphin rush because you're in Tuscany, and
maybe, but we hear this over and over again. So there's something to it.
That's very, very interesting. I mean, and so why is this such a controversial notion then? Why are people pushing back on this?
Well, I think, same as people push, the old guard will always push back initially. I mean, I think there's less and less pushback because more and more people are feeling it in their bodies. But there's always going to be pushback against something that sort of goes against their way of thinking.
Mm-hmm. So what are the main kind of trends that you see in the patients that are coming through your doors? I mean, we've talked about gluten sensitivity. We've talked about sort of this carbohydrate intolerance. I mean, what are the things that people should be looking out for? What are the kind of chronic conditions out there that are typical?
Right. Well, the trend, one of the trends that I see is younger and younger people, especially women, because it's the women who usually come in. I'm seeing younger and younger women come in with problems that I used to see older. Women are coming in their 20s when they used to come in their 40s. With more and more chronic conditions. I mean, I see so many people with what's labeled irritable bowel syndrome, which is a totally meaningless name for a whole host of problems. And I think we are seeing that. We're seeing a lot of autoimmune problems, thyroid autoimmune, rheumatoid arthritis. And I think all of these problems are a result of, as you're talking about, the junk that's put into the food, the chemicals in the environment in general, this microbiome that's off, because most of these problems we actually treat in a very similar way. We take them off the common foods that trigger the inflammation, and we treat the gut. Now, sometimes we support the liver, sometimes we do some other things, but most of the time we're doing very similar things, and most people get better. So I think the trend is younger people reacting or presenting with these chronic problems, probably because they started when they were younger. Most of us our age started when we were older.
The advent of these foods wasn't really around in the earlier years.
Exactly. So I think that's what I'm seeing, a lot more and more autoimmune problems. But the other trend I'm seeing is much more openness in the younger generation to want to change your diet and feel healthy. So in the old days, I'd have to spend so much time trying to explain. My generation, I'm almost 60. My generation it's like they're so difficult because you've got to convince them. That's what my doctor said or whatever. They're still caught up in this belief system of Western medicine and our Western way as being right. The younger generation get that we're doing something wrong, and they're very open to change. So, that's, the success of Mind Body Green, and, what people like you are doing is because people know that there's something wrong with the system and with what we've been taught up to now, and they're looking for change. And that's so, to me, that's so exciting.
Yeah, I'm incredibly optimistic, and really optimistic, particularly with very young people, because I think that they're very attuned to what's going on. They look around, they see obese people all over the place, and they see the lifestyle habits that are contributing to those problems that the older generation is having, and they're having this converse sort of, I don't want that in my life, and this is the first generation that's had to see that and experience that. And then at the same time, you can't walk a block in New York City without seeing Organic Avenue or a juice press place and get your turmeric shot, and we got here a little bit early, and I said, let's see if there's a place where we can go hang out for 10 minutes so we don't bug, the good doctor. And we went to the juice press place and had some kale chips, and that would not have existed a couple of years ago.
And it's happening quickly. Yeah, it's
really
quickly.
It is.
So I feel extremely positive. I mean, I am so excited by the young generation. I mean, I have 7 health coaches working with me, and these are all women who were disillusioned with what they were doing, wanted to study nutrition, wanted to make a difference. They live this life, and they went to study it further, and they want to, do something to help people. So, and this seems to be happening all the time. I mean, we have so many patients who come in here, they change their life, and then they go to IIN to go study nutrition because they want to make a difference. So I feel very positive, and I feel positive because it's coming from the bottom. This is a consumer-driven movement. It's not coming from the top. I don't think it's ever going to come from the top. I don't feel positive that the government, that the politicians, that our institutions, that the medical system is ever going to change. It's too entrenched in the medical, industrial, financial, whatever complex that is creating wealth for whoever it's creating wealth for. So they're too entrenched in that. They're not going to change it. That's going to be very difficult to change. But there is a very strong, powerful consumer-driven movement which is growing. I mean, look at Mind Body Green.
Oh, it's crazy.
It's unbelievable.
I mean, every month their website traffic seems to double, and Jason will say that, all the web experts out there would tell him, oh, well, you'll never break the glass ceiling on this number because nobody's that interested in wellness. And he continues to, blow away all those benchmarks. And that's phenomenal. I mean, that speaks to the promise for all of us and for our country. That definitely feeds the optimism.
Right. And it's young. I mean, it is a young movement, which is fantastic.
Right.
So,
and we all have the power to vote with our dollar. And so as much as it's consumer driven, we can support those businesses that are cropping up around that.
And I think we all should be doing that. Yeah. I think that's important. We should be supporting those businesses because, there's so much money. Look at you in California. Look at the GMO labeling. And look what you have to come up against. I mean, these are, billions, hundreds of millions of dollars fighting to keep. Have you seen the latest thing? They want to label it themselves.
Yes.
I mean,
yeah, I know. It never ends, and I'm constantly beating a dead horse with this issue on the podcast. So, I mean, but it is remarkable and amazing that they were able to defeat that initiative, Prop 37.
But I do think it's changing. I mean, there's no question because I've been in this movement a long time, and every year it just, it's not just slowly happening. It's like exponentially growing, and it's so exciting. It's wonderful. I mean, I'm very, very positive about the next generation.
Yeah, me too. All right, but I can't let you go. I got to ask you a couple specific questions. So I know that you're a big proponent of doing detox cleanse, fruit and vegetable detox cleanses, and that's something that was absolutely crucial in commencing my journey. Had I not done that, I'm not sure that I would have taken the next step. It was a profound thing for me. But it's also, that's another kind of sort of controversial thing, and it begs the question of, juicing in general. And there seems to be this idea now that, we should never drink juice, that the sugar in the juice is bad and we should stay away from that. And, I don't go a day without having, my own juice that we make at home, vegetable fruit juice, or my Vitamix smoothies that I couldn't go 2 days without.
Right.
So,
well, I have a slightly different take on this. I think someone like you're probably not carbohydrate sensitive, but too much fruit juice for some people is a problem. When I started getting to juicing many years ago, I bought a juicer and I started. My favorite was apples, carrots, beets, and ginger. I started juicing, and I started putting on all this weight. And that was too much sugar for me. So I'm not against juicing. I am against too much sugar in the juices, too much fruits for some people. But to get back to your question about detox, to me a detox is just an entry point into a healthy lifestyle.
Right. It's like a tabula rasa.
Exactly. It's just a way of getting into eating and living a healthy way. Because what I find with a detox, so my detox isn't a juicing detox, although I'm not against juicing, especially if there's not too much fruit in it. My detox is really about cleaning out the gut. We were talking about that earlier. Supporting the liver and the gut with the nutrients to help the detoxification system, and removing all the foods that could be triggering inflammation and toxicity. And once again, to me, it's just that entry point into getting. So people feel, after 2 weeks, feel so much better. They go, I can actually feel like this. So they don't have to listen to me anymore. They listen to their bodies. And then we get them on a healthy plan. So that, to me, the detox is just such a great little boost, a sort of pushing the reset button more than a long-term thing that anyone has to do. It's just a great way of getting healthy, starting that journey.
Right. Starting over.
But I think that you bring up an important point, because I'm not against juicing. I think juicing is a great way of resting the digestive system.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I personally do smoothies every day. I'm a big Vitamix smoothie person. And, I love my juices too. And Juice Press do make good juices. Right. But I do think we do, I am wary of giving people who carbohydrate sensitive, which is a lot of people, too much fruit juice. I
understand that. Yeah.
That is you need to just be aware of that more than it's an issue for everyone.
And I would say that to be clear, when I and Tyler sitting here, we make juices together at our house, and they're very vegetable based. Like, I almost use fruit just to cut the flavor, so it's a little more palatable. But it's usually kale, beets, spinach, celery, things like that. So it's much lower glycemic.
Sure. And look, you're a perfect example of it working. Chris Carr is a perfect example of these things working. So I'm definitely not against it. I just tell people, just be careful of putting too much sugar, because I know from I love the sugar, so I wanted the sweet.
Right, I got you. So if somebody's listening to this and they're kind of at that crossroads point in their life where they're grappling with how to live more healthy, but they're not quite there yet, but they're interested. I mean, how does somebody begin this journey of trying to figure out, what their food sensitivities are, what their intolerances are, and how to take that first right step?
Okay, so the first thing, I rarely do blood tests for food intolerances. Now, for a couple of reasons. Over the years when I used to do them, I found that the results changed so frequently, and especially changed after you clean up the gut. So I usually don't do the blood tests. I put people on elimination diets, as we were talking earlier. I tell people, remove the sugar, the gluten, the dairy. We have it on my website. We have a cleanse diet and we have a Be Well Living diet. Both of them, the cleanse diet's a bit stricter, but we remove the common foods that cause a problem. I often at the same time clean out the gut, but then after that you start introducing foods and you see how you react to those foods. So we start with the foods that usually don't cause a problem, but sometimes do, like the nightshades. You reintroduce them, you see how you feel. Then you can start with maybe a bit of soy, maybe a bit of dairy, whatever. But you slowly, one at a time, every 2 or 3 days, reintroduce a food or a food group and you see how you respond. And you listen to your body. And the beauty of that is you start becoming your own doctor. You start becoming, it's awareness training. I think a lot of what we try to teach patients is awareness training, where it's aware of where your mind's going, but it's also aware of how you respond to food, to your peers, to your boss. So the more aware you can become, and including to how you react to foods, the better it's going to be for you in the long term.
Right. I think that's a great sort of introductory message. And I think that it is important that you do have to kind of clean things up first before you can really see how these different foods are affecting you. I mean, for example, if you just want to know if you have a gluten sensitivity and you cut out gluten from your diet, everybody's going to feel better because they're not going to be eating as much processed food. So by virtue of whether it's gluten or anything else, they're going to feel better. So you have to kind of get to a baseline, from a scientific point of view so that you can really objectively evaluate what's going on.
Yeah, I think that's important. I think it's, a lot of people come in here and they say, well, I stopped dairy for a week and maybe, stopped gluten for a week. But I think it's much better if you cut out all these foods first and you start at a new baseline.
Mm-hmm. Great. All right, so I'm going to let you go.
That's all right. I'm enjoying it.
You want to keep going?
Yeah.
All right, good. So where do you see wellness heading? Like in the next 10 years, if you had your druthers, what is the next thing?
Oh, I think it's just a huge growing movement, and part of it. I can tell because the financial guys, the money people are starting to get involved, and so many people want to either invest in my company, invest in something health. They're coming to me for advice because they see wellness is hot. So I think that's good and can be bad. I mean, I think, but the fact that the investors are starting to realize that wellness is here, as they say, wellness is hot, and it's obviously here to stay. So I think you're going to see more and more big money coming in, supporting whether it's Mind Body Green or wellness companies. And I think that's basically a good thing if we can all stay true to our truth and not sell out.
Yeah, I think that there's a danger of being co-opted. Just like you see a green, all natural label on every food product that's essentially meaningless. But at the same time, you see things like CVS saying we're not going to sell tobacco products anymore. Like that's real. That's a legitimate shift.
And I think it's up to us to stay true to the truth and not to sell out. And I think there will be some people that sell out. But I think there's going to be a core. I mean, I honestly believe there's a lot of core people who really believe in this and will do it intelligently. So I think this is just going to grow. They're going to be more and more healthy. And the same as you come to New York now and you see juice places all over. I think in 5 years' time you're going to see healthy restaurants all over. I mean, New York is interesting. I mean, this has been going on in LA for much longer. But when something grabs hold in New York, it grabs hold.
The rest of the world. I don't know. I mean, I think New York rivals LA any day of the week in terms of healthy restaurants. I mean, there's so many.
I think it's just going to explode. I mean, grass-fed meat, for instance, was so hard to get. You're not a meat eater, but when I eat meat, I'll eat grass-fed meat. Now I see more and more restaurants doing it. Well, gluten-free is sort of almost passé. So many places are doing gluten-free, but I see more and more healthy restaurants. I have chefs patients who say to me their priority is good, tasty food, but we shouldn't be thinking of it, is it healthy or not healthy? They just want to make good, tasty food that is automatically healthy.
Right.
And I think that's what's going to happen. It's going to not become, do I have to eat healthy and cardboard and food that isn't so tasty, but I want to eat healthy. I see that happening. That these healthy restaurants are becoming really good. Restaurants.
It doesn't. They don't have to say they're this kind of restaurant or that.
Exactly.
They're just delicious. I mean, if you go to Cafe Gratitude in Los Angeles, it doesn't say that everything is plant based, and you don't have to ask the question. You eat your meal there. It's absolutely delicious. It's a wonderful environment, and you leave wanting to go back.
And I think that's it. Yeah, and I think that's going to happen more and more. I think this young generation, I mean, there's so many people are getting into nutrition. I think the web has been such a positive thing. Yeah, it's got its problems, but the way people are getting educated now, the young people, is fantastic. So I definitely see this big shift with the 20-year-olds and younger, a major shift in how they see things. I mean, I have so many patients who've come in with their mothers, like young 20-year-old women who really been screwed around by the medical system and sick. They've been online and sort of worked out what is sort of going on with them. They've come here with their mothers, and you go through everything with them, and it makes perfect sense with them. And they keep looking at their mothers and say, I told you so, more. I told you so. We've seen this so often. I mean, it's becoming like a common thing. The mothers thought the kid was crazy. And it's just beautiful to see. And so I think there's more and more of this younger generation educating my generation. So I love it.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, we're seeing that. One of the questions that always comes up is, well, how do you get your kids to eat more healthy? And there's no magic bullet answer to that other than leading by example and providing healthy alternatives. And it takes time and being patient and being flexible when they go to a friend's house and all these sorts of things. Right. And we have a particularly sort of strong-willed 10-year-old daughter who has her own ideas about how things should go and was very resistant to healthy eating for many, many years. And now my wife's favorite thing is to post Instagram pictures of what she's choosing to pack in her lunch. She's making healthy choices, and she'll always tag it with something like, the microbes are changing. The microbiome is taking hold of her brain. And it's amazing and encouraging to see that.
It's
Not because we told her she had to, but she's making
It's
that
fantastic.
choice.
And even going to Costco, I mean, they sell these big bags of organic almond flour at Costco. Things like, the recipes that are on the web for these healthy desserts, coconut milk and all. It's just, I'm amazed at, and I've been helped a lot by my health coaches because, over the years, it's been me telling people, okay, you shouldn't eat gluten, you shouldn't eat this, yada, yada, yada. Now I have health coaches who actually give specifics to the patients, and they come up with Pinterest pages with all these amazing recipes. And now my wife, in the last couple of years, has been making these unbelievable desserts because I love my sugar. I love that sweetness. And, now I can have my chocolate mousse made with raw cacao and coconut milk and chia seeds and a bit of stevia. I mean, things that... So there's the availability of having the same dessert or the junk food that we all crave. You can get it in a healthy form now. I think that's becoming more ubiquitous, which I think is...
Yeah, it's overcoming this idea that there's a sacrifice involved.
Exactly.
Because when,
Thank you. Yes,
at our age, going to the natural food market meant going to that terrible place where everything tastes horrible.
Exactly.
And it's just not that way anymore.
Thank you.
They've really figured it out.
Yep.
And that doesn't, I think that means two things. On the one hand, there are incredible, healthy, delicious alternatives to, let's say, ice cream, because you can get this coconut milk stuff, or you can make it yourself, and it's absolutely fantastic, and you don't feel like you're sacrificing anything to eat it. At the same time, there's also the advent of, lots and lots, many, many, many more processed foods that say, this is gluten-free, or this is dairy-free, or this is sugar-free, or this is fat-free, or it's vegan, or whatever it is. And it plays a mind trick on you because you think, oh, well, this is this, so this must be healthy, when in fact it's a heavily processed food. So I think you have to have some discernment when it comes to that.
No, that's right on. I mean, I think there's so much of that junk health food out there. But at the same time, I think you nailed it. I think my idea of healthy dessert or healthy food was not really that taste. It was like, I'm eating it because it's healthy, not because it's delicious. Now... That's shifted. I mean, you get from, everything can be absolutely delicious and healthy. Right. And that's the way it should be.
When we were younger, it was the carob bar, right?
Exactly.
Or like the horrible tasting.
Exactly. And you had to make a choice, and you used to eat this crap because you thought it was healthy. I mean,
It was terrible.
and that's changed. And that's probably only in the last 5 years that I've seen this real shift, that I don't need to get that crappy, there's delicious, healthy food.
I think it also brings up an important issue, though, which is the economics of all of it, because, not everybody can go to Whole Foods and afford that Coconut Bliss ice cream, and that stuff's pricey. And when you see the Blueprint juice that's $12, and, I'm sure it's great, but it's like, that's ridiculous. So for somebody who's on a budget, it's very easy to be dismissive and say, well, I'd eat well if I could, but, it's not in the realm of possibility. So how do you help disabuse people of that idea that eating healthy, it doesn't have to be a Whole Foods, Whole Foods, whole paycheck?
Right. Well, I'm going to sort of answer it first by saying, not really answer it, but I need to bring up the point that the problem is the foods that get subsidized by our government, by our tax dollars, are all the unhealthy foods. I mean, they've just bailed out the sugar industry fairly recently in the last couple of months. So our tax money is going to subsidize all that food that we shouldn't be eating, and that's why it's cheap. Put that aside. What's the practicalities of eating healthy on a budget? I mean, I think it is partly a problem, but what we tell people is, the EWG.org, the Environmental Working Group, has a wonderful list of the Dirty Dozen and the Clean 15. So try buy your fruits and vegetables organic, and the ones that are relatively or have fewer pesticides, those aren't as important. So we give people that list, or we tell them to look at that list.
Right. The Dirty Dozen is a list that comes out every year that identifies the 12 foods that are really important that you get organic.
Exactly.
Because the pesticide levels are so high in those.
Right. And that's EWG.org. So we do that, but then we start really teaching people to cook at home and eat at home, and that becomes much cheaper. And if you can't get organic ingredients, you don't get still get your fruits and vegetables. Just try eat food as close to nature as possible, foods that haven't been altered by the food industry. So I think the more you encourage people to eat at home, the less expensive it's going to be. But I don't know if it's a problem. It is sort of a upper middle class thing to do. It's very difficult to eat healthily on a very low budget. It's a problem. I don't know what the solution to that is. It's actually criminal, but that's just the way it is.
I had a guest on the podcast a couple months ago, a guy called David Simon, and he wrote a book called Meatonomics, and he really did an economic analysis on the food subsidies and how this has impacted our economy. And when you do the math and you look at how much of our taxpayer dollars goes into subsidizing the manufacturing of, whether it's livestock or grains or what have you, that McDonald's Big Mac, which is whatever it is, $2, $3, actually comes out to, some crazy number, like I can't remember what it was, but it's like $9 or something like that. So we actually are
exactly
paying for all this in our own way.
I know.
And to be able to kind of reframe it and think about it might be, it's not going to solve everybody's problem, but it's interesting to kind of think of it in those terms.
Yeah.
And I think until we really can enact some legislative change, on Capitol Hill to really address that in a real way, it's going to be difficult to really change that paradigm. But I don't know how optimistic I am about that.
Right. And the other, and it's not happening enough, but I know, I work with a non-profit in South Africa, and we started growing, vegetable gardens at the school because these kids, I went there one year and the kids were getting bread and jam for lunch, and that was their lunch. And I saw all this, all this ground around, and I thought, I've been teaching at Rancho La Puerta, which is a spa in Mexico, and they have
we
this
were just
big,
there. I was just there.
How those vegetable gardens, and what's his name, the gardener? Oh, he's an incredible guy.
Yeah.
So I thought, why can't we do this here? So we started growing vegetable gardens at the schools, and first of all, the kids would learn about the vegetables. Their health changed dramatically. The principals couldn't believe, from ADD, and a lot of them are HIV positive, because this was the only meal that they were getting. But the point is, if we can encourage people to grow their own vegetables, that would be great.
Right.
I don't know how realistic that is, but
why can't it be that every public school has its own garden? What is why would that be so difficult to create? Even if they were small little hanging gardens and it was part of your curriculum to learn and take care of like a small amount of growing carrots and kale or something.
So I think this is the direction that I would like things to, in the next couple of years. I think that's where I'm going to start putting some energy into these simple things that I think can make a huge difference. I've seen it happen in South Africa. There's no reason why it can't happen here. I know it is happening a little bit, but it could become, it should be spreading all over.
But they're doing it kind of on their own volition. There's no sort of policy from above. I went out and visited the public school out in Queens that implemented the plant-based diet out there. PS, I forget what it's called. Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
There's an amazing it's the first public school in the country to implement a plant-based diet.
Wow.
And I went out there to meet with them and have them on the podcast and hear about this. And it got a lot of press because it's like, vegetarian diet.
Right.
But it really wasn't about that. That was almost a byproduct of a systemic commitment to wellness at this school, basically an elementary school for kids, where it's woven into the fabric of their everyday existence, and they're growing their food in the back, and they have tower gardens in the library.
That's fantastic.
And they're learning how to make healthy snacks, and their after-school programs, and all this kind of amazing things that are happening. So there are these sparks that are occurring. We just have to fan those flames.
I think so. Yeah, and I think we all need to work together, whether you're a vegan or you're a paleo. And it's crazy.
God forbid, right?
Right. And I think, we need to, somehow And I know Mind Body Green is trying to do that type of thing. And I think the more we can create those type of forums, the better.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a beautiful way to end it.
So even though I like to eat sort of paleo-ish, well, I'll make my peace with my vegan brother. Yeah,
we'll smoke the peace pipe,
right?
African style, South African.
But I think it's crazy, yeah, because I agree with you. I think we're all saying the similar things, and people just get caught up with such dogma. It's absolute nonsense. Yeah.
I mean, I share what's worked for me, what's changed my life.
Right.
I don't have any judgment on anybody else's decision over that, and it's not my prerogative to tell anybody what they should or they shouldn't do. I would like to put out a healthy message and try to help inspire people to
which you're doing.
Think about their health and their fitness.
Right. You're doing it, and you're doing a great job. Yeah.
Well, so are you. You're an inspiration. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you.
You're a busy guy.
Thanks, Rich.
So I hope that our paths cross again soon.
I'm sure they will.
All right. So cool. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Peace. Plants. All right, people. That's our show this week. I hope you enjoyed it. Frank was awesome. You want to learn more about Frank, go to his website, drfranklipman.com. You can find him on Twitter. You can find him on Facebook. You can find his Be Well products as well through his website. You want to read his books. Again, they are called Revive, Stop Feeling Spent and Start Living Again. And his second book is Total Renewal, 7 Key Steps to Resiliency, Vitality, and Long-Term Health. You can find those on Amazon. Just use the Amazon banner ad as your way to get there. You know how to do it. Want to learn more about plant-based nutrition? Check out our course, The Ultimate Guide to Plant-Based Nutrition. You can find that on mindbodygreen.com. 3.5 hours of streaming video content and an online community and downloadable tools and everything you need to get more plants in your life. Whether you've been eating plant-based for a long time or this is brand new to you and you're just trying to wrap your brain around it, it's a good place to start. It's a great program. We're proud of it. So check that out. We got swag at richroll.com. We have our vitamin B12 supplement and my athletic recovery product, Chai Repair. And we got some other cool products there too. I'm not even going to tell you what. Just go check it out. Go to richroll.com and you will see for yourself. What else? I think that's it. We're out of here. Nothing left except to leave a comment on the blog page. Tell us what you think about the show. Leave us a review on iTunes if you have a minute. That helps us out. And again, tell a friend. Thanks for stopping by, you guys. Hope you dug it, and we'll see you next week. I'm out of here. Peace. Plants.